Hello. Whoa. Ow. Hello and welcome to this video. And on this video, I'm going to be going through 10 albums that were big letdowns for me. So this video is going to be called Letdown Albums by my favourite bands. Okay? So these are not necessarily bad albums, you know, because I love these bands, you know, but these are bands when I bought the album, or got their hold of the album, and I was like, oh my God, you know that thing? I've spoken about this on the channel quite often, you know, that the way that if you don't like an artist and you hear an album by them that is actually really good, you're going to be sat there fighting in your mind to try and find how it's not that great, and vice versa. You know, when you've bought into an artist and then they bring an album out and you don't quite like it, you will fight your way through that album trying to draw any goodness out of it. And there's a number of things I want to discuss, aspects of that, because these top 10s aren't really about the top 10s. This is what it's really about, is it talking about music and how it works, and so we can all have this sense of community. Go, yeah, exactly how I think. And I felt like that about that album, and exploring why it was and what was going on, and maybe the cultural things that were happening at that time in history. So that's what I'm going to be doing, 10 albums that were letdowns for me of the artists I like. Now, of course, I like these artists. You might not like these artists anyway, but I do. And so when these albums came out, it was a letdown. So I'm going to start at number 10. This happened a lot to me. Throughout the 1980s, I was buying records, vinyl records. But the 1980s saw the beginning of the CD. I bought a CD player not because I wanted the quality. I was quite happy to listen to my records, but I noticed that there was albums on CD that weren't on vinyl. Okay? And at the beginning, I can remember having, when CDs came out, I had this catalogue of the albums you could get. There wasn't that many. And I noticed there was 2 albums there. One was Tour de Force Live by Al Di Meola, which I went out and bought. And the other was Warning by Billy Cobham. Now, this looked incredible. I'm Billy Cobham's biggest fan, right? I've now bought a CD player. And the CD player promises you that you can have better quality music, more expansive frequency range, no cracks and pops, absolutely pristine, perfect digital recording. You could, if you wanted to put Jam on your CD, you could, and you could still play the CD, which frustrated me because there's so many progressive rock albums that I'd put Jam on and they didn't play, and I was like, God, you know, how can I live my Jam spreading, oral experience if I can't do it? And then CDs come out with that technology, which was touted, wasn't it? They said all the time, so people are like, finally, I can spread Jam on my CDs. Brilliant. That was all sarcasm. That was not true. Not that was sarcasm. Right. So, Billy Cobham comes out with this album, and it's called Warning. Billy Cobham's done an album called Warning. He's sat on the front, big muscles. He's playing so fast, you can see the blur on the sticks. And this album had got a warning on it. Watch out when you play this album. It's digital. It could kill you. There's so much bass and treble and quality on there. And the blistering Billy Cobham drum fills are going to come out and they're going to strangle me around the neck with their, oh my God, I got to get this album. So I ordered it and I got this album. When I took it home and put it on, what it sounded like was a bunch of badly produced, reverby drenched themes to various 80s TV shows. Right. There's a couple of tracks with that old fire of Cobham kicked in, but there wasn't that many. But I looked and I thought, well, he's done Stratus on there, and Stratus is one of the greatest fusion albums ever. And I got to that, and he'd ruined Stratus. Not just with the production, but it had none of the groove or feel or dubbiness of the original. And also, he'd changed the melody into this sort of comedy melody. I mean, I love Billy Cobham, right? And this album is nowhere near as bad as I make it out, I suppose. The thing is, the label that was really pushing this commercially was GRP, and GRP had got this sort of digital master thing that they would put on their albums, and Cobham had moved over to GRP, and these albums have got a certain thing about them. If you go back a few years and you listen to an album like BC or where he's really exploring disco, Those albums on major labels, you've got, you know, backing vocals, string sections. They're full on productions. With a lot of these GLP albums, they're very good recordings of people, but you've just got the band there, and that band dynamic doesn't change. But I don't feel like they capitalized on the band dynamic. It feels like everything's been overdubbed in lifelessly, and that is the only way to describe this stuff: lifeless. The digital recording did not do what was promised. Especially in the early days, it was brittle and sharp. There's lots of horrible DX7s on this album, and this album basically represents my experience of being a jazz rock fan in the 1980s, listening to these 1970s bands and then getting excited that they were bringing out a new album in the 1980s, and then rushing out to get this album only to be let down when I found it sounded like the theme to an American sitcom. So that's what I got number 10. At number 9, I have got Scream by Chris Cornell. Now this album I bought into when it came out. So Chris Cornell is perhaps the greatest rock singer that's ever lived, I would say. His band Soundgarden is one of the greatest rock bands of all time. They are my favourite band of the Seattle scene. They sound like somewhere between King Crimson, Black Sabbath, and odd time signature Mahavishnu Orchestra. Incredible band. Matt Cameron's incredible drummer, and on top of this you have Chris Cornell's incredible vocals and songwriting. Chris Cornell is plagued in much the same way as Kurt Cobain with sociophobia, I think it was. And in the mid-90s, he brings out the solo album Euphoria Morning, which is an absolute work of genius. And we get a series of albums. Also with Temple the Dog, he then does Audio Slave. This is all brilliant stuff. But his own stuff is deep, right? He is an incredibly dark songwriter. But he does have one of the most incredible voices. And it does make you think, you know, what would it be like if you got a singer with that sort of voice and stuck him with like a pop producer like Pharrell or Timbaland and made a pop album with a singer like that? What would it sound like? That would be interesting. So when I heard of this Scream project that he was making with Timbaland, Timbaland's the producer that, you know, came to the fore, you know, doing incredible stuff with Missy Elliott. Get Your Freak On. If you know that track, that's Timbaland. But this album doesn't sound like that. This album sounds like a very, very tame pop album. Now, I think the thing that ruins this is not Timbaland. I think it's Chris Cornell. Because I think the aesthetic that he goes for, and there's a couple of tracks on here with real bands, and there's a couple of sort of slower numbers, which are okay. But this is a bizarre failure of an album. Of course, we can appreciate, you know, Chris Cornell's incredible vocals, but it's basically Chris Cornell on a bland pop album. At this time, he'd done that music to the James Bond film. He was crossing over to being a mainstream artist at this point. And Chris Cornell's not a mainstream artist, but this was the moment. There was a big furore about this when it came out. Some people loved it, some people hated it. I went out to see him live doing it and played some of the songs with the band. Was so much better. That's what Chris Cornell does. I feel sad that it didn't work. I was all in for this. This is an example of me buying into it by an artist I really like and being aware of what is going on and how weird it is. But I think as time has gone on, nobody mentions this album. It's sort of been just sidelined. And those of you who know Soundgarden will go, really? You know, this album had a massive push, you know, videos everywhere, you know, massive, big promotional campaign because it was Timbaland and Chris Cornell. Very strange thing when musicians try and write some hit records. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't work. It's not a bad album. You know, if you like pop music, it's a very good album. And I know pop fans who hate rock music, I played it to and they go, oh yeah, I really like this. It's a strange album, but it was a letdown. Right. At number 8, I've got Doo-Bop by Miles Davis. Again, this is an album I wanted to work, and it didn't. Okay? So Miles Davis in 1991, he wanted to explore rap. Of course he did. Miles Davis was always cutting edge, and he always wanted to be playing for black kids on the streets. He had got no interest in playing to that intellectual elite. But the trouble was, is that what had happened. I went to see Miles Davis in 1990, and who was sat in that room was a bunch of musicians and then very erudite middle-class people who liked Miles Davis because they got, someday when Prince will come. And then the 80s returned with Time After Time, which had become a signature number for that sort of yuppie class that loved that. And that's what he was at that point to the mainstream. And he was getting interviews on big, TV shows. And he'd become, finally, a mainstream celebrity. That's what Miles Davis was. But he wants to do the rap. So he puts the feelers out. And the trouble is, someone put him in touch with this rapper called Easy Mo B. Now, if it had been Tribe Called Quest, if it had been NWA, if it had been Ice-T, would Ice-T have murdered this album like he did when they hooked that Body Count guy up with Black Sabbath for the Forbidden, and an album that I need to talk about at some point? Because it's not as bad as you think. Anyway, and this album's not that bad. There's some of the moments on here where they've transcribed Miles Davis's solos and they've mimicked it with other lines, where you can see how incredible his soloing was at that point. But Miles Davis wasn't well at this time. This album came out, it sold a lot of records. It was a big album at the time, and it is Miles Davis's last solo album. It really does sound like Miles just blowing over someone else's tracks that they're rapping over. It just... The trouble with jazz and hip-hop is with hip-hop is people saying interesting stuff over an interesting sample. That's what it is. The sample will often refer to the history of music. This is the original hip-hop. You've got like incredible fusion or funk or soul or whatever it is, sometimes krautrock, whatever it is. You get an interesting sample and then say something interesting. On this album, the samples are not interesting and the rappers aren't saying anything. They're just rapping about Miles Davis, and it just does not work, and it sounds really lame. And as time has gone on, all the bad hip-hop sounds awful now. Absolutely awful. Because it sounds trite. And that's what this album sounds like. And it's a terrible thing that Miles Davis's final album is this album, Doo-Bop. That's what I got at number 8. Right. At number 7, I have perhaps... He's in the top 3 artists for me. This is the great genius of jazz rock, Jan Hammer. I love Jan Hammer. He's underrated. People don't realise how incredible he was. He is like the Charlie Parker of jazz fusion. When the Mahavishnu orchestra comes out and he gets that moog and he starts to play those lines on that moog, that is the sound of jazz rock. Right, that's the sound of jazz rock. Maybe Billy Cobham's sort of machine gun drum solos and very fast guitar playing. But we had heard that before. But that moog sound, which is sounding like an electric guitar, but it's also sounding like Indian classical bends. And Jan Hammer was brilliant. And he was an incredible composer who had a sound of heaviness in his compositions, which I think was in the Mahavishnu orchestra because it disappeared for the Mahavishnu orchestra when he went. But I can hear it in Like Children, I can hear it First 7 Days, I can hear it in Oh Yeah and Melodies and Live with Jeff Beck. And those 5 albums are jazz rock masterpieces, and Oh Yeah is one of the greatest jazz rock albums, right? Once he went from that, before he then has huge success doing the Miami Vice, he does 2 albums with some English musicians, I think. The first is called Black Sheep, which is okay, where he really explores the keyboard as a guitar. There's a version of Manic Depression on that album, which is unbelievable, by Jimi Hendrix, and he does it on keyboards, and he pulls it off. And for that one track alone, Black Sheep does not make this list. But the album that came afterwards, Hammer, I haven't got a clue what he was trying to do with this album. He formed a band, I think got Colin Hodgkinson, who is a British jazz fusion bass player. He's almost like the Britain's Jacko. He's on there. They got a singer on there. I don't know what to say about this album. It's just like the worst rock album made worse because it's not got electric guitars on it. It's got Jan Hammer's keyboards. I don't know what to say about this. It's just like the worst rock album ever made. The songwriting's awful. And the thing about Jan Hammer is not only is he an incredible composer and musician, he's an incredible engineer and producer. If you go and listen to Wired by Jeff Beck, that was produced by George Martin. But when Jeff Beck heard the mixes that Jan Hammer was doing, and he handed over the tapes, and Jan Hammer mixed that album, right? And that's why it sounds so incredible. He'd got this compressed, funky, dark, analog sound. It's incredible. This album sounds awful. It sounds tinny and little and tight. Now, if you go and try and listen to it, you're going to have to search around to hear it. It is on YouTube. That's the place to go, and you will hear it. But this album has been completely glossed over. I think it was released as a double album with Black Sheep. Of course, there's some killer Jan Hammer Moog solos, and I can live with that. I can live with that. If that's on the album, I'm happy. But what Jan Hammer was thinking on this is a bid for commercial success. After this, he forms that thing with Neil Schon, doesn't he? And he writes some sort of MTV, friendly AOR rock, doesn't he? And that's okay. That's good, Jan Hammer was going for it. He wanted, he'd given up on Fusion. He was one of those guys who realised that Fusion, he realised it on first 7 days, he was doing something else. And I've got to respect him. This is him floundering around trying to work out how a jazz rock musician, that's a keyboard player, a jazz virtuoso, becomes a pop star. And the answer was to do the music to Miami Vice. Anyway, that's that one done. Right. Number 6. I've got Light Years by the Chick Corea Electric Band. In 1986, I was listening to Radio 3, and there was an interview on the jazz program that was on a Sunday afternoon with Chick Corea. And Chick Corea came on and he said, I'm bringing fusion back. I'm going back electric. At this point, Chick Corea was doing a lot of very esoteric sort of acoustic jazz, avant-garde jazz. He'd done all the children's songs. He was on ECM records. It was often piano, string quartet, violins. It was all that type of stuff. It very esoteric. I loved it. His trio music, which is a double album of free jazz and then tributes to Thelonious Monk, was one of my favourite albums in the 1980s. That's what Chick Corea had become. He turned it back on jazz fusion. He wasn't playing all that stuff. It wasn't Return to Forever. Suddenly, he's coming back. He's got this band called the Chick Corea Electric Band, and he's spelt electric with a K, right? And you've also got the K in rock. And I thought, that's a good sign. It's got a C and a K at the end, electric. That's C and K, that's half of rock. Is he returning to the rock? Right, he'd got these whiz kids on, these new young whiz kids. Dave Weckl on drums. You've got John Patitucci on bass, Chick Corea, and then he'd got one of my favourite guitarists, Scott Henderson, on guitar, and Carlos Rios on this. And this first album comes out, and we run and get it. And things like Got a Match, they really re-established jazz rock. If you listen to virtuoso jazz rock musicians now, it sounds like a mixture of Chromosome by Mike Stern and Got a Match. Those are the two aesthetics that we've ended up with. This is an incredible album. Now, when I got it, there was a few moments that were a bit Muzak-y. I've got to be honest. There were a few moments. It was a little bit. My mate said, I said I was listening to Chick Corea's Electric Band, the first album. And he goes, I don't like this. I said, why don't you like it? He said, it sounds like cans of baked beans. And although I don't know what he meant, it does seem to sum up that album. But it was so influential and so important, right? Scott Henderson, as explained to on this channel when I interviewed him, couldn't deal with the cult of Scientology that this band was in. And it seemed like you had to kowtow to that cult. Weckl seemed to be able to do it. John Patitucci was a born-again Christian, so he seemed okay. But Scott didn't like it. And, Scott explains that Chick Corea was really running this like a rock band. So he wanted, Scott to do sort of, not just sit there and play, but just sort of do rehearse routines. They all walk to the front and they do this. And Chick Corea gets up in his guitar and they duel. And he wanted all that showmanship in there. And the reason was because he was making some money. This was big stuff. So Scott Henderson goes and they get in Frank Gambale. I knew who Frank Gambale was. I'd got those albums, right? Brave New World or whatever it's called, can't remember. I got them on import. I'd heard Frank Gambale when he came out on Flexidisc on Guitar Magazine. This was the guy, Frank Gambale. And I'm like, the trouble with Frank Gambale's first solo albums, they're a bit Muzak-y. This destroyed everything in the 80s. But surely not with Chick Corea Electric Band. Surely not. Surely not. So I wait for this album to come out, Light Years. My God, it's just the worst 80s produced bunch of attempts at pop hooks. There's no playing on there. The drums sound like they're programmed. Frank Gambale sits limpid in the background, throwing in 8-bar length guitar solos every now and then, never does anything fiery. I had to wait for the GRP Super Live to come out, and that second disc is a Chick Corea Live show, and Frank Gambale starts playing, and on the albums after that, you start to get the Gambale fire with Chick Corea Electric Band. Light Years obviously sold well. You know, you got a lovely black and white photograph of Chick Corea on the front in his designer jacket, which they all had to have at that time. It's a pile of pants. It's just awful, right? I went to try and find it. I think I've given it away or something. So that's that. Chick Corea. Chick Corea is a god. Light Years. Now, the opening track, which I think was called Light Years, right, when I had the album, although I hated it, that first track does have some hooks on. It's got this incredible syncopated bass line, slap bass line by John Patitucci. He goes, and then he's got this keyboard that goes, that is hooky, and I love that track. And I used to get every morning to play that one track over and over again. So I'm not against it. It's just these guys don't really understand how hooks work. They're jazz musicians. If you want a hooks, go and see Jeff Lynne or somebody like that. I don't know. Shall we move on? At number 5, I have got a Frank Zappa album. Now, it's hard. Frank Zappa's made 100 albums. They're all incredible. He's never made any really bad albums, right? Now, you could say Ruben and the Jets is a bit of a letdown because it's an album of doo-wop tracks, and I'm not too sure they want to listen to that. Francesco Zappa, where he does these sort of synclavier versions of Believe It or Not, a composer called Francesco Zappa that wrote compositions in the Renaissance era. Those albums we could call letdowns. But what about Zappa doing what he does? When that's the letdown? Is there an album by that? And there is. For me, the album Just Another Band from LA is a massive letdown. Flo and Eddie, that band has never been my favourite, but Chunga's Revenge is pretty good. 200 Motels is a work of genius. Fillmore East is okay, and that could nearly make the list. But for me, Just Another Band from LA, it's got a brilliant Cal Schenkel cover with them all in the car looking like dogs or whatever it is. Beautiful cover. Right, it's a live album. Now, when we get a live album, what we're going to get with Zappa, we're going to get lots of edits. We're going to get all this stuff, overdubs. Like, it's going to be incredible. No, we don't get that. So this album, basically, side 2, is a bunch of live versions of tracks that we've had before. I don't need them. Just don't need them. Right? You get rid of that. I'm going to listen to the originals. If Zappa's going to do that, I expect Zappa to do something with it, and he doesn't. You know, there's a bit of improvisation. The album's not particularly well recorded. It doesn't seem like at all a great performance that you get with some of his live albums. But on side 1, we have Billy the Mountain, the side-long epic, which is a predecessor. That's not the right. Is a forerunner to Gregory Peccary, which is one of Zappa's greatest moments. Billy the Mountain is just crap. It's got a nice theme to it. Right, it's a stupid story. It's offensive in parts. But most of it is just that stupid bass riff with Flo and Eddie just talking over the top for hours on end. Right, that's that. Billy the Mountain's rubbish. It's offensive. It's not well recorded. It's not great. Of course, Zappa's compositions that are in there, because it's a 7-minute composition stretched over a whole side. You know, Just Another Band from LA by Zappa. Let down. I'm going to move on from there. Right, number 4. I've got an album which is pretty good, because I was going through what are my favourite artists. That's how I did this, and Weather Report are undoubtedly one of my favourite artists. I've got every single album by Weather Report. I bought them in order. I absolutely love that band. This is their final album. They've run out of steam. And it's not one of their best albums. If you go and check it out, it's not a bad album. Carlos Santana's on there, and he has a bit of interest playing with Weather Report. It's not a bad album at all. It's a competent album. There's one album which I think is a letdown in every single way. And it's called Weather Report. Now, their debut album's called Weather Report. And then in 1980, with the classic band, which is Zawinul Shorter, and then Peter Erskine and Jaco Pastorius. They go back in the studio and make this album called Weather Report. Why they called it Weather Report is, I think, because they had no inspiration whatsoever. The cover is awful. It's just the red letters of Weather Report flying through space. I don't know why. Right? This album is just a non-event for me. It's well played. It's well produced. The compositions are competent. It sounds like Weather Report, but there is nothing. I mean, you got Dara Factor 1. That's about the only track, and I couldn't sing it to you. There's nothing on there that really sticks out. Now, Jaco, a lot of the time, is at this point, these bass lines are totally doubled by Zawinul. I just put it on, listened to it, and I was like, and it passed me by. I can remember getting it and because Night Passage is incredible. Night Passage, I think, is the album that came before it, is incredible. I think Night Passage is the best album by that band, but I don't really rate the Peter Erskine, Jaco Pastorius band. I know it's a terrible thing to say. 8:30 is good. It's okay. You know, Mr. Gone, it's okay. This one is just really lackluster, and Night Passage is rescued by the incredible compositions on there, which are varied. It goes from them doing a sort of electric big band version of Rockin' in Rhythm to Three Views of a Secret, Jaco's tune, which is one of the greatest tunes ever written. You know, it's an incredible album. And there's got things like Fast City, which is like just proto electric bebop. Night Passage is incredible. This one has got the same limp. It's like that all the way through, which was always the problem with Weather Report, because I think Zawinul got too much control over it. Wayne Shorter's whose compositions were not featured as much. Wayne Shorter just seemed to take a back seat at this point. And Zawinul is basically improvised on keyboards, then transcribing it and giving it to the band. That's what's going on. And that's what it sounds like a lot of the time. I'm not criticising it's good. I love Weather Report. This is not Black Market. It's not even Sporting Life. Which, because I love that Bob McFerrin. That was the sound I just made there. So what we've got number 3. Number 3, we have Tormato by Yes. Now, there's Yes fans who are proper Yes fans who are now going to show, no, I love that album. It's one of the great albums. No, it's not. It's rubbish. I went back and listened to it again just to check, right? What's wrong with that album? Right, I'll tell you what's wrong with it. It sounds awful, right? It's all over the place. The drums sound like they do sound like baked bean tins. The compositions aren't great. It's got Don't Kill the Whale, which is like limp, bloody Greenpeace type song that travels along. There's no real epics on there. What happened here? What happened with Yes here? And I'm not going to accept it. You can say, oh, it's a really good album. Like that's because you're Yes fans. What you're doing is the very thing. I think this album is the best example. Because Yes, right? If we take the first album is a good album. Yes, is a good album. It's not, they haven't got their sound. It's like a sort of cross between, you know, the Beach Boys, the Beatles, the Byrds, and all the bands that begin with B. And then we get Time and a Word, which they're exploring their progressive rock aesthetic there, not quite as successful. Then we have the Yes album, which is genius. Then we have Fragile, which is genius. Then we have Close to the Edge, which is genius. Then we have Topographic Oceans, which is genius. Then we have Relayer, which is genius. And then right when punk's happening and they should be rubbish, they bring out Going for the One. And Going for the One is just like, whoa. I've always said this. I think the greatest side on progressive rock is side 2 of Going for the One. We have Wondrous Stories, which is probably the best example of a short, tight pop song, which Don't Kill the Whale isn't. And then we have Awaken, which is the greatest prog epic ever written. So what happened between then and then this album? Why did it go so wrong? Now, if we look at the cover, maybe there's a clue there, because that cover is not a Roger Dean cover, is it? It's what is that guy? I thought when I was a kid, maybe that's a bloke walking through the countryside and he's playing the drums, but he hasn't got a snare drum. So it's somebody hitting the non-existent drum. But now I'm older and I look at it. Is he divining? Is that what he's doing? He's divining, right? But we have a great big tomato. Someone's thrown a tomato at that album. The band have thrown a tomato at that album. Okay? I think what we have here is these progressive rock bands, they're full of too many talented people. They all banded together, but it's not like being in like the Beatles or being in the Stones where the band is the greatest sum of its parts. They all believe that they're all geniuses, you could tell. The egos are so apparent with these musical, brilliant musicians. So they all banded together and they have success. And at that point, they're willing to work with each other. But then once they have the success, they think, well, I want it to this way and I want it that way and I want to do this. And Bill Bruford arrives at that point and he knows he should jump ship, which he does. And he goes off and does what he wants to do. The rest of them decide to have a break and make solo albums, which they go and do. Right? Relaya is interesting because with Patrick Moraz, they opened up a new avenue. Okay, but then they have this big gap. Patrick Moraz is still in the band, but they bring Rick Wakeman back in. Now they do that, why? Because they want to sell some records. So this to me is an example of what I've seen with musicians. The ego of believing that you know what's right and you've got to have it your way against suddenly getting frightened that you're not going to be a success anymore. They're like politicians. They just want to be in power. That's what musicians are like. And going for the one, again, they then put their differences aside, don't they? But it won't last. And so many progressive rock bands, you can see that pattern over and over again. And you think, why can't they just get in the studio together and work? And the reason is because of that, because their egos are such that they pull in all these different directions. And that's what I hear when I hear Tormato. Compounded by the fact that the production is so awful. Now, why the production's awful, I do not know. Why is it so tinny? I think there'll be all sorts of reasons given, but I don't believe that bands at that level make a mistake like that. You know, they've got too big a budgets, they're in the studio, they've got the best people. I wonder whether it was a reaction towards the more earthier music that was coming up at that time, you know, the rock and the punk and the metal that was happening. And yes, just couldn't quite accommodate for that, you know. Of course, once everyone leaves and they bring in Jeff Downes and Trevor, what's he called? The Buggles, once they bring the Buggles in and they'll do what they're told, we get a really good Yes album, probably the last great Yes album, which is Drama. And it's a shame because Tormato is a blot on their 70s output, which apart from that is absolutely jaw-dropping, isn't it? Maybe a remix would do it, I don't know. Maybe it would. Right, what have I got at number 2? Oh, I don't want to go here. This is, I've got to explore something here. I don't think this album's a letdown, but I was let down on it when I first got it. This album is by the Mahavishnu Orchestra and it's Inner Worlds. Okay, now, Inner Worlds was the last Mahavishnu Orchestra album. I mean, it is the last Mahavishnu Orchestra album. John McLaughlin came back in the 1980s with another band called Mahavishnu, and that's not the Mahavishnu Orchestra, it's his version of the electric band. It's his 80s music band. More recently, he's returned to the Mahavishnu Orchestra with that album with Jim Herring on guitar, where they've gone back. I don't think it should ever happen. It's the Mahavishnu Orchestra. It was originally that band with Cobham. Now, he pulled off a blinder when he then put the band together with Narada Michael Walden and Ralph Armstrong and John LePonte. And those albums are even greater to me. I'm starting to think that Apocalypse and Visions of the Emerald Beyond are even greater. Visions of the Emerald Beyond is the greatest album ever made, in my opinion. So imagine me as a kid, and I love Visions of the Emerald Beyond. And I'm searching for Inner Worlds because it's hard to get over the albums. I had to get it on second hand on vinyl. So I'm looking for Inner Worlds. Eventually, I track a copy on vinyl down, secondhand, take it home, and I put it on. And the first track on that, on Inner Worlds, is like sort of starts off with Santana, a lot of percussion, a lot of congas, Narada Michael Walden just killing it on the drums. And then they come in and they're just jamming, and it's great, but it is just a jam. There's not much going on. We haven't got that sort of compositional density that you have in the Mahavishnu Orchestra. It's just a jam. They put a melody in there that they play, and they go back and they solo that solo. That was really great. And then we have Miles Out come in. And again, Miles Out is just a jam. Great jam. It's out there. Miles Out is out there, somewhere between, Extreme Noise and James Brown. It's out there. And after that, we start to get compositions, but they sound like the compositions from the other guys of the band. Narada Michael Walden comes in with a lovely ballad. We get Planetary Citizen. We get all these things come in. It's just not a Mahavishnu Orchestra album. Now, I think the reason for that is because John McLaughlin had... I believe he'd lost faith at this point, literally. I think the Mahavishnu Orchestra was so successful because he had something he wanted to say, he had something he wanted to get across to an audience. He wanted to, he had a spiritual message to get out there. And I think he did. I think a lot of people who went to see the Mahavishnu Orchestra in the 70s, they saw it as some sort of spiritual experience that they had. And there was something in there that Coltrane was also exploring, but the Mahavishnu Orchestra were able to explore it in front of thousands and thousands of people and sell millions of albums. But I think around about this time, if it all comes crashing down, he seems to have left Sri Chinmoy, his guru. I think his wife had gone off with somebody, another guitarist that was hanging around in that cult, or whatever you want to call it. And I think he was a bit lost. The band still had its momentum. I think there was contractual obligations. He had got an incredible band, and I think Narada Michael Walden and the rest of the band carried it. I think if it wasn't described as a Mahavishnu Orchestra album, I think I'd like it a lot more. And this is the whole point I'm trying to make here: is how these things influence how you perceive, a certain album. Narada Michael Walden then goes on to make the Garden of Love Light, which is his version of the Mahavishnu Orchestra, and it's just a genius album. And this album sounds like a forerunner for that, So what we have here is the example of the name, and how the name can affect your perception of it. Right, I'm going to move on to number one now. At number one, I have In Through the Outdoor by Led Zeppelin. I absolutely love Led Zeppelin. I think Led Zeppelin are a heavy rock band that go beyond heavy rock. They pull in a whole wide variety of influences. And for me, when I got into Zeppelin, I heard echoes of James Brown. I heard echoes of reggae, of the blues, acoustic folk, incredible string band, Robert Johnson, Willie Dixon, jazz, Holst. It was all these. This is what they were pulling in. It was incredible on the way they did it. And they did it without ever becoming too muso-y. By 1979, Jimmy Page is ensconced in heroin addiction, I think. And so he's not really around to make this album. So John Paul Jones takes over, and John Paul Jones has got this new keyboard. And these new keyboards are capable of doing all these sounds. And that comes in, and you almost have that keyboard sound replacing Jimmy Page on this album, and that changes the sound. In Through the Outdoor has that keyboard sound. Now, people who love that analog keyboard sound, people who have grown up with more sort of Beatlesy, ELO type of stuff, will probably like this album because there's more songs on there, there's more keyboards, right? It opens up with In the Evening. In the Evening is like a Led Zeppelin song. It's like a standard Zeppelin song, but with all the energy taken out. It just limps along. The riff isn't particularly inspiring, It's okay, right? If it was on Physical Graffiti, you wouldn't notice it. Then we get three, novelty songs, Southbound in Southwest, which is sort of a Latin American sort of thing, and then we get Fall in the Rain, which is almost like a sort of soul-y, Motowny track, incredible drumming with that half-time Purdy shuffle that Bonham does. Then we get Hot Dog, which is this sort of rockabilly pastiche. I don't like any of these tunes at all. It just doesn't sound like Led Zeppelin, right? And it doesn't push the boundaries in a way that I find attractive. It's far more about Robert's vocals, about the lyrics, and about John Paul Jones' keyboard sound. In other words, what the elements of Zeppelin aren't quite there. So side one is okay. Carusalambra is okay. Goes on for too long. Very keyboard driven. It is not Achilles' Last Stand. All of My Love is about the best song on this album. And that song is basically a forerunner to what Robert Plant's going to do in the 1980s. We're going to hear that sort of balladeering in tracks like Big Log and other hits that he had in the 1980s. I played drums for Robert Plant at one point, so I'm at once trying to step very carefully because I know Robert and I think he's an absolute genius, and he is. But I'm also trying to be fair and give my opinion about stuff, and this album is not one of my favourite. It ends with I'm Gonna Crawl, and I'm Gonna Crawl is like a slow 6/8 blues, loads of keyboards, loads of reverb. It's a bit down, and at the end, Robert starts screaming. And when I say screaming, not like, hey, mama, see the way you move. Not that type of screaming. We talk about, we're talking about falling down a lift shaft screaming. It wasn't Zeppelin that pushed someone down a lift shaft, was it? That was somebody else. But Robert recreates that rock history event there with the now at this point then John Bonham passes away in 1980. The band's no more. This is the last album. Maybe this would have gone somewhere else. I don't know. I couldn't see how Zeppelin were going to survive the 1980s. There's no way. They were too opulent. Too what's the word? Led Zeppelin had been like 4 princes in the Principality of Rock, given license to do whatever they want as they trotted around on their horses, doing what only little princes can do in that situation, and that wasn't going to sit right in the 1980s. It was all short haircuts and pretending you were like a student at the Bauhaus, a revolutionary Marxist. So, In Through the Outdoor was a letdown to me when I bought it. I've gone back to it more recently, and I still don't like it much. And then when Coda came out a few years later, and you heard Wearing and Tearing, and Darlene, even that was better than the outtakes. I mean, Wearing and Tearing is one of why if that had been on there, if they got rid of Hot Dog and put Wearing and Tearing, I would have thought the side one was okay. I could have handled that. All right. And if they'd have put Darlene on instead of, but it wouldn't have been a great end to the album. I don't know. Maybe that's what do I know? I'm not Led Zeppelin, am I? Here pontificating. Now, recently, I have been being negative on the channel, and everyone's come along and they haven't liked it. I'm going to tell you what my reasons are for doing this. I believe that art is the arena where we can have likes and dislikes. We can have prejudices. We can bring in all the worst things of ourselves and put it onto our appreciation of art or lack thereof. Right? When you start to discuss these things, right, what happens is you'll communicate to somebody else what you like and what you don't like. And when you sit down and do that, if you do it with a certain sense of humour, which I am doing it with, if you do it with that sense of humour, you will find that there's things that you agree on and there's things that you don't agree on. And I'm hoping anyone who watches this channel that follows me will turn around and go, I love Astral Weeks, but I can see why Andy doesn't like it. I love it In Through the Outdoor, but I can see why Andy doesn't like it. And in that communication, we celebrate our differences. And if we want the world to be a better place, that's how we will make it better, by celebrating our differences. There's the message of the video, right? There has to be a moral at the end of it all, right? And that's what it's about. So those of you who watch my Astral Weeks video and you love Astral Weeks, but you had a little chuckle as I went through, and you can sit there and go, oh, what a fool, he just doesn't understand. And that's probably true. There's no way an album could be that successful and be that rubbish. It's just my opinion. But those people who sit there apologising for having a bad opinion on YouTube, they're dishonest, right? When I was a teacher of music, I realised that if I gave someone out there, if somebody came up to me and said, Andy, I've done this, what do you think? I go, it's okay, but the drums are out of time and you haven't really got any chorus, have you? I go, oh, I'm not used to that. My nan always tells me I'm really good. Yeah, well, I don't. Right, and they go away, and then they come back with, and then they play it me again, and I go, oh, that sounds really good now. And they believed me. And that was fundamentally my method for teaching, was causing telling the truth. And now I'm on here doing this. I'm going to tell the truth. If I hate something, right, Astral Weeks, I had it in my car. I was going to listen to the whole week to hope that it would illuminate itself to me, like I've done with Trackmass Replica, or I've done with Bitches Brew, or I've done with Ascension by John Coltrane. And I did it. I got 2 days in. I could not stand it. And there was no mystery in there that I didn't understand, right? Except for the lyrics, right? Well, I'm not going to go on about that anyway. The point is, I made my point. Let's celebrate the differences that we all have, right? Come here and have a sense of humour. And if you are upset when somebody criticises something you like, that's because you're insecure and you want to believe it's so brilliant, and you can't stand anybody poking at that, right? And if that's the case, then you need to check yourself, because nothing is that good, and you will be let down in life. Anyway, thank you. Stick a like on now. Go on, stick a like on now for me, please. It helps the channel, right? It won't hurt you. It won't make any difference to you. It will just show you that you like this video, and it will tell YouTube, and it will make my channel better. If you want to subscribe as well, that means that my videos will be shared amongst more people if you subscribe, right? You can subscribe to hundreds of channels. It won't hurt you, right? It's not like you can always unsubscribe if you get inundated with Andy Edwards, you know. If you want to support me, come over to my Patreon, where we've got loads of extra content. And I say we because it is now a we. We've got loads of extra content, loads of extra video stuff. We also have the patron meet once a month, sometimes twice a month. I've got one tomorrow, and that is recorded on Zoom, and that is in there for you to watch. It's quite entertaining. And we now have the Patreon WhatsApp group, which is 40 insane, incredible music fans sharing music between themselves and making friends. That's what you've got Patreon if you want to go for £5 a month. But if you are a busy person, which a lot of you are, because most of you are successful middle-aged men that have done well, and you can't be wasting your time in a silly Patreon, but you still want to support me, because about a month ago my job stopped. I'm not saying I did resign. I resigned from my job for various reasons, and I am now doing this full time. So I am living off the donations, off my Patreon, and off the ad revenue from this channel. Okay, so that's where I'm at the moment. So if you could support me on Patreon, that will keep me going, and I will appreciate it so much. And for those who have, and some people have put in sums that I couldn't afford. So I really do. Thank you all. I mean, I'm genuinely, thank you all for supporting me doing this here. A lot of self-doubt when people are criticizing what you're doing, which they do. You have a self-doubt, but in the end, I'm trying to do something here, and I'm not just here trying to get views. I promise you, I'm trying to do something for the music, and I'm trying to do something for the music that we love. So if you want to be involved in that, please do. Thanks for watching. I'll see you on the next one. And then Roger Waters becomes that, but that's The Wall and Dark Side of the Moon. I know why people love them. I don't know why they like Astral Weeks though.
I like that first.
I quite like it as well.
Oh, you don't? You just saying it?
No, I don't. I was playing it today.
Why?
I like all sorts of music, and that just I like it. I just
I've been in a bad mood. I'm looking at you now. I thought all the way through this, you've been a bit truculent and bad mooded because you've been struggling with that awful album.
Yeah, I'm going to have to play that again before I watch your video.
No, it's best not to.
We're doing.
I haven't seen your Astral Weeks takedown, so
no, there's a number of Kiss albums you could be listening to.
Hey, I totally agree with your take on The Wall, though. I think The Wall is possibly the most overrated album of all time. I think I actually find it unlistenable. Like, apart from the two sort of commercial tracks, I cannot force myself to listen to the whole thing in one go. I think it's just tragic.
Well, someone said on the chat, it really made me laugh, because someone goes, Carl Palmer had this band in the 70s, late 70s called PM. I never heard of this band. And they said it was the worst thing you ever heard. There's a track called Dynamite by him, and it's the worst thing you've ever heard. And I put it on and I went, but if I had this in the car, I could at least listen. I didn't mind it at all. It was all right. I mean, it was awful, but it was awful in a way that was quite entertaining. You know, I like it when these proggers attempt to be commercial and they're abysmal. I can appreciate it. But Astral Weeks, it's as though it's deliberately created to annoy me. I can't explain it. I really expected to go, put it in the car, listen to it all week, and go, this is an amazing album. I didn't get it when I was younger. That's what I wanted to do.
Right.
That's fine. But, I mean, if everyone liked everything, wouldn't life be boring? We wouldn't be having these conversations, would we? You know,
Yeah, but people like Hitler. I mean, you got to draw a line somewhere.
Wouldn't it be great though to find that trigger, like you said earlier, Porn Arts? You don't like the album. It's on my top 10 of all time. How's that work? We're all like-minded people, but we've got such diverse hates, or I like that, I hate it. But we've got a lot of middle ground.
Sasha's put a message in. He doesn't want to say.
Trap Mask.
I like Trap Mask.
Maybe we should all get like 10 black balls in our life, and we're allowed to allocate a black ball to a particular album or track. And then if a track gets, say, more than 1,000 black balls, it just gets expunged from all music services.
Kind of back in the day.
Yeah, definitely. There's a lot of people who hate Astral Weeks. I'm committed to rubbishing this album. Because that Rolling Stone top 500 albums, I use that as a reference. I've got all these different references. I go back to it over and over again. So if somebody was to say, who are the best power trios, I will go back to that and I'll go through. It doesn't mean I agree with it, but I go through it to give me an idea of not my opinion. And I keep having to go past Astral Weeks. You go past Astral Weeks, then 10 down later, it's like a Love Supreme. You go, really?
Yeah.
Really?
I would rather listen to Astral Weeks and never mind the bollocks.
No way. This is a great album.
And we're back to punk.
More talk like that, you'll be expelled from the group.
You actually don't like the Sex Pistols?
I've never liked them, to be perfectly honest. No. The reason why is because they were totally different to what the music I was listening to at the time, and I was so ensconced in prog that these upstarts came along. And don't forget, I'm a little bit older, so it was a lot of the 15, 16-year-olds that were dressing up with the Vivian, the Vivian Westwood outfits and the spiky hair and whatever. But to me, it just I was unprepared to listen. I wasn't prepared to listen to it. Put it that way.
I was trying to make that point. With that Astral Week video, I was trying to make that point. I was trying to go for people to go. See, Andy doesn't like that because he doesn't like Van Morrison. So that affects you, doesn't it? I was trying to show all that's in another context I might like it, but I can't imagine, because I really gave it a good listen, and it's like it's the same 3 chords over and over again.
I just don't have a problem with it. I can listen to it, but I've got that much music and that sort of diverse taste that sometimes it's nice to play something I haven't played for a while. I like classical music as well. I'll play classical music all day, and then some days I can't listen to it, and I'll listen to something else.
Well, I hate Neil Young, right? I hate Neil Young, and so when everyone's
oh my god,
I went. Listen, I went and put Harvest.
You get the gloves off.
Put my headphones on. I put Harvest on. I get 3 songs and I go, this is bloody brilliant. This is a work of art. This is brilliant. It's like when I was like 15, I didn't like Neil Young, but now I'm 56 and I put it on. The production's incredible. His voice is brilliant. The string arrangements on it, the songwriting, it's brilliant.
But it's about your prejudice, isn't it? Yeah. It's like I was prejudiced to punk.
With Astral Weeks. You know, I mean, I really want. I mean, there must be. I mean, Rocket in the Free World, I hate, and I still hate that. You know, and that was my era, and I didn't like that. But Harvest is great. The band, you know, the band are great. I mean, I'll knock them and I'll criticize it. It's not my favorite thing, but the band are great. Can't stand Bob Dylan, but I have to admit the guy's a genius, which he is. There would be none of this without Dylan. So I can. I've struggled with Dylan, but there are songs I do like by Dylan.
But but don't you think there's a connection between Lydon and Dylan in the sense that they both created let's just say a unique vocal style, which sort of in retrospect seems like genius, but at the time people were saying this fucker can't sing.
Well, the thing with John Lydon's interesting is if you listen to Lydon and you listen to a lot of it, he has got he's got different voices that he uses, right? And he's got snarls and stuff like this, and then he's got growls, and he's got this sort of whiny voice. But there's certain moments, his projection and power, he has this incredible vibrato, and he's pitch perfect sometimes as well. So if you actually step back and listen to it, but what he doesn't do is sing like Lionel Richie or Alexander O'Neill. It doesn't sound like that, but it's like whereas Dylan, Dylan can sing better than he sings. If you listen to Dylan, there's certain points you go, well, he gets worse, doesn't he?
Yeah.
on the first folk album, I like that album. That's brilliant. I like it when he's doing the folk stuff. I don't mind that. It's when he goes electric, you know. But if I listen to Like a Rolling Stone, I sit there and go, I cannot believe that this guy did this in 1965. This is it. This is, it's not Chuck Berry. This is it. This is where it all starts with Like a Rolling Stone.
But so you could argue that the early Dylan stuff is kind of like, in a way, it's very punkish in the sense that it's very sort of simple. It's a bloke picks up a guitar and starts howling. There's nothing more punk than that. Like if you talk about the punk ethos.
But when you listen to something like Hard Rain's Gonna Fall, and you listen to his vocal delivery on that, it's ever so strong, and that's got a sort of I really like that track. Right, I mean, I do. There are tracks I like. I wouldn't choose to listen to it. It's my favourite thing, Desert Island is, but I do like it. But Astral Weeks, I know that's what it's like. Hard Rain's Gonna Fall. I'm not that stupid. I can listen to it and go, I know what he's trying to do, but to me it sounds like he's failing at it, and it's because he's too far out. He's an Irish guy that's taken on sort of American rhythm and blues, and in them he does that really good. But when you bring in this jazzy improvised thing, I can't. It just doesn't work. I can't stand his voice. The band's like it's insipid improvisation. I know they're all jazz guys, but I don't find it. It can't go anywhere because it's working around his chords and in vocals. So I think what happened was in 1968, there was a certain audience that was like John Coltrane to them. It was like transcendental to them, in a way, to listen to that album. I think people had parties, they got stoned, they stuck it on the background, and this thing just went on and on and on, like Philip Glass in the background.
Okay, so how would you sort of compare then, say, Moondance with Astral Weeks? Like,
I bought that album first. Moondance is a great album, brilliant.
Right. So it's not just all Van Morrison. It's
no.
Right.